Good evening and welcome to this evening's Audit Committee for Medway Council on the 28th of September. I'd like to know if there are any apologies for absence. No apologies received, thank you. The record of the meeting of the 29th of June, record of the meeting of the 1st of August. May I sign that record as a true record of events? Agreed, thank you. Thank you. Are there any urgent matters for the meeting tonight? No urgent matters received, thank you. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interests or other significant interests in the meeting tonight? No, thank you very much. Now come on to the annual governance statement for 22-23, and I'd like to ask Pinda Gill to introduce this report, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Members have before them the covering report for the annual governance statement for the statement that covers the period 2022 to 23. Appended to the report is the actual draft governance statement, which members will have considered prior to attendance at this committee tonight. The production of the statement is a requirement that we need to undertake each year and is presented to this committee. The structure and the content of the annual governance statement follows a format that is in large being drafted and set out by CIPFA, requiring the organisation to comment on how well it manages its governance arrangements to ensure that there is good standards of conduct and behaviour and the utilisation of public funds in the delivery of the Council's ambition. There are set as indicators, as I've said, across a number of principles setting out what good looks like, and we've followed the format set out by CIPFA, covering all of those issues. In addition to that, most importantly is the comments by our own internal auditor towards the end of that document, where he has given his own view and opinion on internal governance within the organisation. That's contained on page 12 of the annual governance statement, and I'm pleased to record that James has given a level of assurance that we do have appropriate systems of governance in place in order to achieve the Council's objectives. I don't propose to go through the statement line by line or page by page. Members will have read it, and those who've served on the committee before will know that it's a regular item on this committee. So if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to assist members with that, but I'll leave it at that, Chairperson.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gill? Thank you, Councillor Golvan.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very comprehensive and detailed document. I can't think of anything that's been missed, but so I've just got one question. If Mr. Gill or James could answer it. Under core principle G on page 27 of the document, there's a little section that says that because of resourcing issues experienced and that some of the assurance work for 21-22 and knocking on to 22-23 was unable to be completed. Have we now got those resources in place so we can sort of catch up, and have we caught up?
Yeah, I can confirm that we've started to catch up. The quality control process is still a bit behind, so the reports for the reviews haven't been finalised with the clients, but the actual field work that is the detail of the review, all those have been caught up and completed.
Thanks, James.
Any other questions? Councillor Hackwell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the actions that were completed. We didn't complete 12% of them, so 88 out of 100. I just want to get a feel of, do you know whether that's normal for other councils, or are we top of the list, bottom of the list? Where are we with 88% compliance, roughly?
We don't actually do any comparisons against other local authorities. I'd say 88%, given the volume of actions, is actually pretty good. I'd focus more on the numbers rather than the percentage, to be honest, because obviously if you only had 10 and only 2 of them have been done, your percentage is very low, but the actual number of outstanding actions is quite small. I think the performance is pretty good. It shows that services have acted upon the actions that we've taken forward. And as I say, we've in the last year or two, we've taken a different approach, whereas we used to make recommendations and then the service could either agree with them or say, no, we're not doing that. When we identify weaknesses now, as part of the audit process, we actually sit down with the service and say, right, this is the weakness identified. We think you might be able to do this, but what's your view? How do you think you can address this control weakness? And then an actual action to deal with it is agreed, rather than there being a recommendation that's a bit wishy-washy, if you like. So now everything is agreed with the service, so they've got more control over what they're going to do, more say about it, and then it gets done that bit quicker, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? I move to the Vice Chair, please. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now we move to the whistleblowing, anti-bribery and anti-money laundering policies. A report on instances September 2022 to September 23. And I ask Mr. Gill to introduce this report too, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. So members again will have had the chance to read the report and consider the detail. Annual report that comes to this Audit Committee on 3 important policies ensuring good governance within the organisation. Whistleblowing, which locally is called the Speak Up policy, the anti-bribery policy, and also the anti-money laundering policy. In relation to the latter 2, you'll see from the report that we've had no complaints in relation to those and no concerns. In relation to the whistleblowing policy, members will see under table 4.1 on page 33 of the bundle that we've had 8 complaints that were considered during that period. 4 of those were concluded. 3 were found to be unsubstantiated, and 1 which the review group considered was perhaps more appropriately dealt with under the grievance process as opposed to whistleblowing. The remaining 4 complaints that were received are still currently undergoing investigation. The table is slightly different to that which has been provided in previous years. We've provided a little bit more detail to identify the nature of the person who is blowing the whistle, a brief description of the types of concerns that were raised and the outcome. Again, the nature of the concerns is crafted in such a way as to be relatively broad but give you an indication as to the area of concern, but not going into too much detail at this stage whilst matters were being investigated, but also so as to enable members of the committee to get a feel of the types of complaints coming in rather than getting bogged down in the detail. Again, through you, Chairperson, happy to provide any further assistance to the committee if required. Thank you.
Councillor Golvan.
Thank you, Chair. it's a bit unusual this year because normally, as it says a little bit further down in the report, we normally only have 1 or 2 whistleblowing reports a year. Because it's a bit of a Goldilocks figure, isn't it? Because you don't want it to be too hot or too cold, and deciding what is the right level, because if you've got it too low, obviously there could be a degree of under-reporting. If it's too high, that's another thing. So it is a bit of a Goldilocks number. As I say, we've normally been between 1 and 2, and then to get 8, this year it is a big jump. Whilst it's good to see, as Mr. Gill said, that 3 out of the 4 that have been investigated so far have not been substantiated, which is good. But of officers having feeling of why we've had this sort of jump, to go from 1 or 2 a year for quite a number of years now. I believe going before that we were perhaps in the 2 or 3 mark, but still to have 8 in 1 year is quite a substantial jump. Do officers have any sort of idea why that jump has occurred?
Through you, Chair. Unfortunately, I'm not able to shed any further light on this. I think there may be a couple of factors sitting behind this. Firstly, as you see in the table in 4.2, for previous years, the number of instances has been incredibly low, and I would hazard a guess as that was unusually low. Maybe, and COVID is apportioned or given blame for a lot of things these days. I hesitate to do that, but that may have been a factor behind that. But on other occasions as well, sometimes people come across the whistleblowing policy and they'll use that rather than raising it through other methods. To have 8 in a year for an organisation this size and the complexity of this organisation, I would say is not a high level, and in one sense it provides a level of reassurance that actually members of the public and officers and members are aware of the policy and know where it is and how to use it. And even more reassuring is the fact that where complaints have been investigated, of the ones that have been completed, they've all been unsubstantiated. So that again gives us a level of reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Can I just shed a little bit of light on this? When we discussed this and we at previous meetings and we were concerned about the low level, when we changed the title to Speak Up, one of our aims was to encourage people to use the. And just to make a note, and for you particularly, because I don't think you were party to the night that we had that discussion, but I think it's a good thing that we've changed the title. We've made it easier for people to do it, and we're having proper investigations. Sorry, Councillor Hackwell, I know you have questions. Sorry.
Yeah, it's related to that, in the fact that why do we still insist and call it a whistleblowing policy when we actually went through a long debate to say it was a speak up policy, yet in the middle of all the report it says whistleblowing, whistleblowing, whistleblowing. I just don't understand why we were reverting back to something that we had a long debate about to change the name to make it more easy for people to actually raise their concerns.
I totally understand the comments that Councillor Hackwell has made. I think at a local level we call the policy Speak Up. But I think if you speak to Joe or Jane Bloggs in the street and ask them what the Speak Up policy was, they may not necessarily understand, whereas actually the phrase whistleblowing is in far more common usage across the country. But I'm more than happy to take those comments back and in any future reports, just simply refer to it as the Speak Up policy.
Have I any other questions? Okay, may I move to the Vice Chair then, please? Thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, everybody. Now I come on to the Treasury Management Report, Quarter 1. And I'll ask Jonathan Lloyd to introduce this report. Thank you. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. This is an update on Treasury Management based on Quarter 1. This is an additional report which meets the revised reporting requirements in the CIPFA code. Previously, we've only brought forward the strategy, a mid-year report and an outturn. We will now produce these reports for quarters 1 and 3 in addition to those 2 reports. Interest rates are thought to be near their peak. Paragraph 4.3 shows the latest forecast from Link that was available at the time this report was produced. The rise in the Bank of England rate to 5.5% shown in the table did not happen, as you will have seen last week, following the slightly better inflation news that we got. However, rates are expected to remain at relatively high levels for some time. Link continue to recommend avoiding taking long-term borrowing. However, with the position right now today showing about £100 million of borrowing maturing in 2024-25 and about 54 million still to mature in the current financial year, I'm reluctant to take loans with maturities before April 2025. The 2 most recent loans, which were taken in August and September of this year, have maturity dates in 2026-27. Borrowing remains below the capital financing requirement, which is good news, of course. And on the LOBO front, as reported in paragraphs 6.3 and 7.2, after the end of quarter 1, one lender exercised their option to increase the rate payable on their loan, and we had no hesitation whatsoever in repaying the £5 million owed on that loan. As a net borrower, we do not have a lot of Treasury money to invest. Most of our balances are required for day-to-day cash requirements, so most of the cash is on deposits with banks or with the CCLA money market fund. Our performance, based on the low level of risk we're taking with cash investments, is in line with our peers, as shown in the graph in paragraph 8.2. The capital values of the property funds continues to decline, as shown in the table on 6.1. The capital losses, the paper capital losses, I should say, are currently reported as reserve movements. But if we were to sell those investments, we'd have to record that loss through revenue. And so there are no plans to sell at present. Our financing costs are still expected to be within the budget, as shown in paragraph 10.2. And that's all I have to say, so over to questions.
Thank you. Have we any questions for Mr. Lloyd? Councillor Golvan, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I noticed in 5.1 you talked about the new loans taken out were slightly longer duration, because you've expressed a wish, quite a number of audit committees over the past that we need to wean ourselves off short-term borrowings and to longer term. From what I gather, it's only just slightly longer, isn't it? But do you see we're going to be able to continue that trend of trying to edge the length of our loans up a little bit?
Ideally, I would like to lengthen the period. However, at the moment, rates are thought to be relatively high. So we don't want to be locked into long rates, into high rates for longer than we have to. But at the same time, the sort of £100 million level is about what I would... We've got a £150 million short-term limit set in the strategy. I really wouldn't want to push right up to the 150, and 100 feels sort of fairly comfortable to me. It gives me wiggle room, you know, should we have a sudden expenditure that we need to borrow for at relatively short notice. But at the same time, not getting up to those high levels. I mean, previously, up until the end of last year, the limit that we'd set ourselves for within 12 months was 100 million. And my thinking in asking for that increase to 150 was just to give us a bit of a buffer, really. So they're at the level that I really wouldn't want to push them, and putting them a couple of years down the line is a bit of a compromise between, you know, pushing out very long and not having too much in that, maturing in any one year.
Thanks. When it comes to the property funds, it's a pity we haven't got any surplus funds, because now will be a good time to buy. Am I right, Jonathan? The returns that are in the table are just for 1 quarter, aren't they?
The returns are a sort of annualised rate.
So it's an annualised rate of only 1% for the interest.
Sorry, which table are you looking at, Councillor?
Hang on. The 6.5, because it says opening value 31st of March, and then the closing value 30th of June, and then dividend received. So is that dividend just for a whole year, for the 12 months, or just for the 3 months?
I'm sorry, that particular table would be the performance for the quarter. So those would be the dividends received in the quarter.
So just on the back of a fag packet, I'll make it about 1% for a quarter, which is not bad, is it? So
well, you have
4%
to sort of,
a year per annum.
yes, but you have to balance that against the fact that the capital values have been declining as well.
Yeah.
So if
But
you
they
were to
were
look at the
bought for-
if you were to look at the overall return,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be brilliant.
No, but we've got to look. But as far as cash flow into the council is concerned, we're
Yes,
Yes,
so
it's a good
this is the advantage we have at the moment, because the dividends go straight into our revenue account.
Yep.
The capital losses at the moment we just treat as a reserve movement.
Yeah.
Now that concession is currently scheduled to end, I think it's at the end of March 2025. I'm sorry, yeah, it's extended for another 3 years. What the government decide to do thereafter, I don't know. In the meantime, you know, the values may have improved. We may just decide to sell them anyway. I can't say what we're going to decide to do in future years. But at the moment, as I say, the capital values we're able to park unless we decided to sell, in which case we would have to take the hit.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm intrigued about the Lobo redemption. Just out of curiosity, what was the difference in the rate between the actual Lobo rate and because I presume you've had to borrow 5 million for the redemption. So what was the difference in the interest rates between the two, just out of interest?
I'm going to have to speak from memory now, so this may prove, when I look it up, to be incorrect. I think the Lobo was at something like somewhere between 3.7 and 4.5%. Those are the sort of ranges that we've got on our Lobos. The lender wanted to put the interest rate up to something like 6.5%, but we were able to refinance at around about the 5% level. So it was definitely not worth us going with their deal. The surprising thing about the Lobos is that now that rates have crept up, I'm a little surprised that more of our lenders haven't said, yes, we'd like to exercise that right. Perhaps it's because they know that we pay immediately. But I must admit, I am curious as to why we have only had that one inquiry so far.
And it was interesting that, just a comment at the end, I think it was interesting that Link, like most of us, didn't judge the pause in the interest rates, and in fact, a lot of people are now saying it's peaked. That's it. It's for the moment. But I think all of us got that one wrong.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for the report. Just a couple of questions. As you mentioned in your spiel, we've got about 160 million maturing in the next couple of years. And what sort of risk have we got? Obviously, we don't want to, as you stated, we don't want to sort of refinance them now because we're hoping the interest rate is going to go down. But what sort of risk do you think we will have in 2026, 27 compared with the rates that we're paying now? I know it's crystal ball gazing, and we expect the number to go down. But you know, will it be double what we're paying now, or you know, what's your feeling?
These loans are at fixed rates for the duration of the loans. Now, rates have, and these are all, well, with the exception of a couple of PWLB loans that are donkey's years old that are maturing, the bulk of what we've got to repay is to other local authorities. So they would have been taken out for relatively short periods, not normally more than a year, 2 years at most. You get the odd one for 3 years, but they're few and far between. So they will be, and I haven't got the list of loans and rates in front of me, but those would have been taken out at lower rates than you'd currently have to pay for loans of those particular durations. So as those mature and we have to refinance them, we are having to take a hit because we're having to refinance them and pay a higher rate than we were paying on the loans that were maturing. And I can see that continuing. Rates are not expected to fall off a cliff. They're expected to higher for longer is the expression that the government keeps saying. And indeed the advisors go along with that as well. So those loans maturing in the next couple of years are likely, as we renew them, to cost us more. Perhaps a couple of percent. Depends on how recent the loans are. Obviously, the more recent they are, the nearer they're going to be to current rates. But any that are getting on a bit, that were for a lot of the lengthier durations. Yeah, I haven't got the rates down on there. My colleague has very helpfully pointed out one of my own tables in the report no, sorry, this isn't in the report. It's a list of our loans, but unfortunately, it's not a list that's got the rates against them. But so,
So there is a risk. An educated guess on that?
I can't put an educated guess off the top of my head, but it is going to, and indeed, you know, it is costing us more as things have progressed. The loans that we repaid this year that we've had to renew, take out replacement loans, those have been a couple of percent higher than the loans that were maturing. Oh yeah, and I've just got information on the LOBO that would the lender Commerzbank wanted to increase the rate to 6.35%. Not quite as bad as the 6.5% that I think I sort of remembered. I knew it was well over 6.
On the chart in 8.2, which is the red and green line with the scatter points, etc. I haven't been on the Audit Committee for a couple of years, but it seems a very familiar pattern that we're just above the red line in our peers. Are we doing anything to actually try and get in the middle of that line? Because it seems that we always seem to be just scraping below the lower limit. And I wonder what action we're taking to be more in the middle, effectively.
That's a bit of a difficult one, Councillor. Don't forget, we have relatively little cash. It's only day-to-day cash, so that we can't do anything very adventurous with it. We can't put it out for 3 or 6 months because, generally speaking, the money that we've got, I would expect to be shelling out in the next month or so. If we got more money than that, I'd think that I've actually not done my job properly because I try to I try not. We're doing a lot. A lot of our loans are short-term loans, and they're geared for. We've always got something to repay each month. So if we're flush that month, we don't need to take out a replacement loan, for example. So a lot of the authorities that they're comparing us with are able to, have got pots of money, and you know, they're able to put to use a greater range of instruments and greater durations, and greater durations tend to give you better returns. The fact that we are within those tram lines means that our performance is in line with expectations.
May I call on the Chief Operating Officer?
Yeah, thank you. So Jonathan's explained that absolutely perfectly, but just a bit of additional context there. Those authorities that are generating exceptional returns on their investments, they've probably borrowed in the past to fund those investments, which is something that's frowned upon anyway by government and SITFA. And they're the sort of authorities that have come unstuck and have issued Section 114 reports more recently as they've been caught a cold, essentially. So we take a very risk-averse attitude to our investments.
Do I have any more questions? May I call on the Vice Chair, if you would put on your mic.
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 35 that the committee notes the contents of the report.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We come on to item 8, the Counter Fraud Annual Report 22-23. And I'll ask James Larkin to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. The annual report for counter fraud, which can be found at Appendix 1, outlines the performance of the team against the agreed work plan for 22-23 and brings together the information provided in the 3 updates presented to the committee during the year, along with additional information relating to work completed since that last update. Section 3, starting on page 52, details the resources available to the team during the year. The projected resources at the start of the year, which took into account the working days of all staff, less annual leave, allowances for training, administration, etc., was forecast that it would be 442 days available for counter fraud work. However, 528 days of chargeable activity were undertaken, with 3.4% of that time spent on fraud awareness and prevention, 13% on proactive counter fraud activity, 72.7% on investigative activity, and 10.2% on other counter fraud activity. Section 4, starting on page 53, provides details of all the work undertaken in the areas under the fraud awareness and prevention category. Members will be able to see that there has been a number of sessions with other services to raise awareness, and work has also commenced on fraud risk assessments. Section 5, starting on page 54, details the proactive activity that has been undertaken, which mainly relates to the National Fraud Initiative exercise. There is some brief information relating to this, but members received the annual report on NFI in June. Section 6, starting on page 55, provides a summary of the results from investigations undertaken during the year, including the savings identified and other actions such as the recovery of 2 council properties. Section 7 gives a brief summary of the other counter fraud activity linked to liaison with the DWP and other investigative bodies. And you'll note that the team had 9 performance measures for last year, which are detailed in the table at Section 8, starting on page 57. Members will note that there was good performance in all areas. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Thank you, James. Any questions, please? Sorry, Councillor Golvan.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a question, because I think it's a very good report, but I'd just like to highlight paragraph 7.2 for the costs of the team of 136,321. The savings from that total 851,998. I think as a committee we should, perhaps if the Vice Chairman could take that, I think we should be thanking James and his team for their really good effort in this. It really is a splendid outturn. Can't praise them enough. The detail of it, I couldn't see anything there I could really ask a sensible question about, but I would just like to make that comment because I think it's a really good outturn.
I'd like to second that, Councillor Goulven. This is a really good report. It's a really good outcome, and we will note this committee's thanks to James and his team formally. Thank you. Councillor Hackwell.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah, well, thank you, James. Thanks for the report. I just want to highlight the council tax section where we said that there was only 500 investigations, which saved, identification of liability of 355 as 185,000 liability of future years, and 121,000 in housing benefit overpayments, which is quite a lot. I'm surprised that there's only been 4 criminal cases, one of just a fine and 2 and 3. What precludes us from doing more criminal actions for people that are actually committing fraud? It seems a very low number compared with the amount that we're getting and the number of people we're investigating.
Yeah, that is a fair comment. I think the reason there has been less criminal activity is, if you imagine the 400 plus cases, the individual amounts involved in that are all relatively low. Obviously, there are costs associated with taking forward a prosecution because of legal costs, etc. So we have to consider, is it in the public interest? If we've had a loss of £300, is it worth spending £1,500, £2,000 or more to prosecute that individual? So everything is assessed on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, where we have grounds, where we have sufficient evidence to take something forward criminally, and the amount of money means it's deemed to be in the public interest to take that action, we do obviously consider that. The couple of cases you've mentioned there, we've obviously determined that actually there are alternatives to prosecution that we can exercise on this occasion. So we've taken that step, right, but again, partly because of cost, but we've decided the offer of an alternative to prosecution in the first instance. Obviously, if those hadn't been accepted, we would have proceeded to go to legal and ask for a summons to be issued. I do know that we've got a case with legal services at the moment that we're waiting on a summons being issued, and there's another case where there was an operation last week, but I can't go into detail about that because it's ongoing. But we are looking at criminal stuff as well.
Any other questions? Councillor Nestrov.
Thank you, Chair. It's more... Okay, I have a question. I'm not really sure if we can implement that, but I just had an idea. Can we somehow incentivize people for reporting fraud? For example, if we can offer some % of the money that we collect or we're gonna save, maybe residents and the public would report it more?
Potentially, some local authorities have incentivised it and they haven't offered percentages, because if we got a case that had a lot of money, there'd be quite a lot for them. No, some local authorities have offered financial incentives to people to report those, although they would only normally pay out if it resulted in a positive outcome. What we're working on is obviously educating the public as much as we can. We are planning some work. Every November there's what they have International Fraud Awareness Week, so we're planning on what we're going to do over that period, and we're looking at potentially having the fraud officers at libraries with a stand kind of thing so that people can come and talk to them. We do get information from the public. Unfortunately, a lot of the time they don't give us sufficient information for us to proceed with something. I mean, we had an anonymous one a couple of days ago that I happened to see, and the person's talking about an individual who they suspect is committing fraud, and then one of the questions on our online form is what's their address, so that we know where we're looking, and they said I'd rather not answer that. So it makes it very difficult to know we could have 5, 6 people matching that name, but with no clear indication of who it is we're supposed to be investigating. So it's an option, but I don't think that it's worth it at this moment in time. I think what we've got to focus on is just getting that awareness out there. I think the sheer annoyance of people that someone's getting away with it is often enough for them to want to report it. So that's what we kind of rely on at the moment.
I've got a question for you, James. We talked about the raising of awareness internally within the council, and you said you were going to sort of lead a campaign on that. Has it been helpful, and sort of how do you feel about the success of that?
Well, as you'll have seen in the report, we delivered fraud awareness sessions to quite a significant number of services. We carry out an annual survey sort of every May, June that reflects on the previous year. Now we've done a lot of work in the last year. So when we did the survey this sort of May time, I was hoping the awareness amongst those responding would be a lot higher. We didn't get as many responses. I mean, last year when we did the first survey, we had 200 responses, which was phenomenal. We didn't get anywhere near that this year. And unfortunately, a lot of the people were responding. We don't know if it's the same people as last year, but unfortunately, a lot of the people that were responding were still saying, don't know much about it, didn't even know we had a fraud team, which is worrying. Well, I'm hoping it means the people that were responding were not members of those teams that we'd been to. But we have continued to push that, as I'll come on to when I do the update for the first half of this year, on progress so far this year. We've been doing more sessions. We've also put sessions on the council's training site so that staff can book on and attend generic sessions, but we're still reaching out to services to say, look, let us come and talk to you, and then we'll get to know a bit more about your service, and then we'll come back to you with a session tailored specifically to the fraud risks for your service. So we're still working on it. With an organisation of this size, it's going to take a little while to get round. We've also got turnover of staff to consider, so some people we see are not, may have changed. But yeah, we are continuing to push it.
Thank you. Any more questions? May I hand over to the Vice Chair, please?
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 49 that the committee notes the work undertaken by the counter-fraud team for Medway during 2022 to 23 in providing an effective service to the council, and the committee would like to thank James and his team for all their hard work.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Now we move on to the Internal Audit Annual Report 22-23, and I'll ask James again to introduce this report, please.
Thank you. The Internal Audit Annual Report, which can be found at Appendix 1, outlines the performance of the Internal Audit team against their annual work plans for 22-23, and again brings together the information provided in the updates presented to the committee during the year, along with any additional information for work that's been completed since the last update. The original plans were based upon projected resources at the start of the year, which, as with the fraud plan, took into account staff working days, less annual leave and allowances for training and administration, etc. That projected forecast was that 780 days would be available for internal audit work. However, due to the impact of a vacancy and some other overruns of work from the previous year, 700 days of chargeable activity was undertaken. Now, 97% of that related to internal audit assurance activity, and the remaining 3% was on consultancy activity. As the Council's Chief Audit Executive, I am required to deliver an opinion on the adequacy of the Council's governance arrangements, framework of risk management and system of internal control. This is the basis for the opinion is formed in part by the internal audit assurance work undertaken throughout the year, but also considers other forms of assurance, including external inspections, and all of that feeds into which obviously all feeds into the process for the annual governance statement that you've just heard this evening. These factors are detailed in section 4, starting on page 65, and I have reflected that where we have identified weaknesses, the actions for improvement have been accepted by management with a commitment for them to be implemented. My annual opinion can also be found on page 65, and as you'll see, I have given a positive opinion for the year, as we've referenced a short while ago. Section 5 on page 67 provides the real detail of the work undertaken throughout the year. As you'll see in the initial bullet points, the agreed plan was amended throughout the year to take into account changes to the resource available, and the committee approved these changes in year. The tables in this section, so that's page 68 onwards, show the results of each planned assurance review for members' consideration and the current position for any reviews that are yet to have reports finalised with clients. You'll note the outturn for planned delivery as of 31st of March was 84% against the target of 95%. However, all reviews have since been completed, and we've been working hard to clear a backlog of quality control work. I'm hopeful that the remaining reviews will be finalised before your next update in January. This is followed by 2 tables commencing on page 100 that detail the responsive or alternative assurance work and also consultancy work undertaken during the year. The team had 13 performance measures for 22-23, which are detailed in a quality assurance and improvement programme. Those performance measures are listed in the table in section 6, starting on page 102. Some key things to point out, IA7 shows the level of productive chargeable time, and 85% of our available resource was spent on assurance and consultancy related work. Measures 11 and 12 relate to the actions agreed through the course of audit reviews, and you'll see that 88% were implemented during the year, and as we've already discussed as well, that was 88 out of 100. The details of the actions agreed and those completed can all be found in the table at section 7, commencing on page 104. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Any questions, please? Councillor Golvan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, James, a very, very good and thorough report. The only question I've got, when we talk about independence assurance of how effective our arrangements are, I noticed that the last time that we had an independent outside assurance done was by Tunbridge Morning Borough Council in 2018-19. Are there any plans to do one? Because that does seem quite a long gap between we've had the last outside assurance. So do we have any plans in the near future to get somebody in just to give us the once over?
Yeah, as members will be aware, we've had our external quality assessment for internal audit, and that resulted in a positive opinion earlier this year. That particular element is the counter-fraud service. Because I am responsible for the counter-fraud service as well as the internal audit, I cannot ask my auditors to review that team, because obviously I've got control over it, so it could be argued they're not acting independently. We can have, as we did previously, we can have conversations with the other local authorities, because there are KCC, for example, and Tunbridge Morning, they're in a similar position. Their head of audit is responsible for the counter-fraud functions as well. So they're in the same boat as us. So what we did last time was a reciprocal arrangement. We did it for them, they did it for us. So we can certainly this has been raised at Gravesham as well, so we can certainly enter into those discussions and see if we can get something set up.
Councillor Hackwell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. James, just a little bit of a process question, really. I note that most in the detail of the reports and the actions rather than your summaries, that a lot of the school findings are similar. Like the governors are not declaring their interest, the payroll's not authorised properly, the credit cards aren't authorised. So we seem to have a sort of endemic problem with schools. When you audit one school, do you issue your findings to all the other schools, even though you're not relating the school perhaps that there was audited, just so that the other schools are aware that when you audited, they found these problems, so they can then sort of like have an internal reflection before you turn up and point them out to them.
Through you, Chair. Funnily enough, we have had some conversations because there's a head teachers network that officers from finance attend, and they have approached us about would it be of benefit for us to go and talk to that group to highlight these are the common things we're seeing, these are what you need to sort out. So that is something we're looking into. Obviously the schools all operate independently of each other, but we are considering going to that head teachers network just to point out these are the common things we are seeing, so you probably need to be aware of it. So yeah, that is in mind, and we are trying to work out how we're going to go about that.
I just wonder whether, this is obviously in the public domain, this report, I wonder whether it's worth dropping head teachers a note, whether they'd read it or not, to say that, you know, the information on other audits is available publicly on the website.
Yeah, that's certainly something we can think about. The head teachers of the individual schools, obviously like any other client, actually get all the reports and agree them with us. So, but we could potentially share the findings with other head teachers, yeah. Yep.
Any other questions? I move to the Vice Chair, please.
I remove recommendation 1.1 and 1.2 at page 59 that the committee notes the work undertaken by the internal audit team for Medway during 2022-23 in providing an effective service to the council, and the committee support the opinion of the council's internal control environment provided by the head of internal audit and counter fraud shared service as set out in section 4 of appendix 1, that Medway's council framework of governance, risk management and risk management and system of internal control was sufficient and effective and contributed to the proper economic, efficient and effective use of resources in achieving the council's objectives. I also note there will be a conversation to explore setting up reciprocal independent audit arrangements.
Is that agreed? Thank you. I now move to counter fraud update for the 1st of April to the 31st of August 2023, and I'll ask James Larkin to introduce this report also. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report at Appendix 1 is the first update on progress against the plan for 23-24, detailing the work of the counter-fraud team from the 1st of April to 31st of August 2023. Section 3, commencing on page 116 of your pack, shows how resources have been used over the period, detailing the level of time spent on each of the key areas outlined in the plan. The tables in section 4, commencing on page 118, provide an overview of the work undertaken in each of those areas as well. As a brief run through, for fraud awareness and prevention, we have committed resource to fraud awareness activity, again, to try and seek improvements in this area following the results of our counter-fraud survey. And the fraud risk assessments are also in progress, with the initial assessments for inherent scores being completed. For proactive counter-fraud activity, there has been a heavy concentration of resource directed to the NFI to clear matches that other services have not been able to deal with, as well as reduce the number within our own remit. We have moved on to the creditors' matches that the committee asked questions about at the June meeting. As expected, we have systems in place to identify duplicate payments that run in the background of the finance system, so we haven't actually found any problems. With everything that we have identified has already been dealt with, but we've also been using that as a sample of data to make sure that we've got appropriate procurement and contracts in place for the people that we're paying, so we're using it as a two-pronged approach. The savings relating to each exercise are detailed for information, but it should be noted that these cross financial years and will not tally exactly with other stats detailed in the report. The table commencing on page 119 shows the summary of results from external investigations and the associated savings. There's a brief summary of other counter-fraud activity in the table on page 120. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 5 of the report, which is on page 121. Approximately 239 investigations have been concluded with associated cashable savings of £259,095 and notional savings of £93,000 during the period. That's in comparison to Medway's share of the fraud cost of the service, which this year are £236,815 for the year because the size of the team has been increased. I can't guarantee we'll hit 800 odd thousand like we did last year, but we'll certainly do our best. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, please? Councillor Goulburn.
Not so much a question, just a comment on the thing. Whilst James has just said he can't guarantee, but it's not a bad start for the first quarter, is it? You've already 352, so you've more than covered your costs in the first quarter, so well done.
Thank you, Councillor Goulburn. Councillor Hackwell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick numbers thing on the council tax. You investigated 223. Well, I think we've got something like 112,000 properties in Medway, so it's a very, very small number that you're investigating. Is there any, and you seem to have made out of that 223 quite a large, is there any scope for increasing that number, or is it, you know, we're really looking at the marginal edges, or what you know, that's the sort of question.
What this largely represents is what we would refer to as the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. A lot of these cases fall out of the National Fraud Initiative, so this is data matching. It's identified an individual has a single person discount, but there is more than one person on the electoral register. So they're fairly quick to deal with, and as you can see, the volume of cases, again, as we talked about earlier, they're all fairly low value. What we have is those cases are fairly easy to deal with, so the investigators can deal with those alongside the more complex cases. So we've got a constant churn of results while we're dealing with the more longer-term complex stuff. We could look at more, but I think we do a fair bit of work on council tax every year, and that's where the bulk of our savings do tend to come from. What I'm actually looking to do is move the team to look at other areas where we're spending a lot of money. Believe it or not, social care is an area where there are significant fraud risks. For anyone that's seen in the media, Hertfordshire in the last year or so had a case in the hundreds of thousands for someone that had been receiving direct payments on the basis of a false need for care. We pay out significant sums in various areas of social care. We've done some work around no recourse to public funds cases as well in the past. So what we're aiming to do is actually move into other areas of the council that we perhaps haven't in the past done a lot of work with, to see what else is out there, what else can we find. It's all well and good looking at council tax all the time, but because in a lot of cases the value involved is fairly low, we've got to have higher volumes to get those sums. And that's not necessarily sustainable. So we want to look at areas where the cases are, there's a smaller number of cases, but potentially much higher value that we need to deal with. So we're kind of exploring other areas. We are also planning some proactive work around housing as well in the future. So we'll see what happens there.
Okay.
Do I have any other questions? May I move to the Vice Chair then, please? Is that agreed? Move to item 11, the internal audit update, 1st of April to the 31st of August 2023. And I'll ask James to introduce this again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, the report at Appendix 1 is the first progress update for 2023-24 and details the work of the internal audit team. This focuses on the plan that was agreed for Q1, Q2. Section 4 on page 127 of your pack shows how our resources have been used over the period and also details the fact that we are projecting a loss of approximately 40 days. That's largely due to underestimates in the amount of time to include work that was overrunning from previous year and also other work that the team have been involved in linked to the Medway review. Full details of the reviews from 22-23 that have been finalised since April are included in the annual report because we wouldn't normally receive both on the same night. So the tables in section 5, starting on page 128, focus on current year only. The tables on page 129 detail the other assurance and consultancy activity that has been undertaken by internal audit as well. An update against the team's key performance indicators for this reporting period is provided at section 6 of the report, which starts on page 131. We have made reasonable progress against the agreed plan with 17% delivered and a further 20% underway as of 31st of August. Obviously, these outturns are based on the number of reviews expected to be undertaken with the resource we projected to have available at the start of the year. As of today, I can tell you that for IA 9A, which relates to the proportion of agreed assurance assignments delivered, this is now 23%, and 9B, which is the proportion of assignments underway, is also 23%. Finally, section 8 of the report provides an update in relation to all agreed actions in the tables commencing on page 133. The second table on page 137 details actions outstanding more than 6 months after their agreed implementation date. Now, in some cases, the services were able to provide an update for us to include in the report. Some didn't quite make it in time for the committee deadline. The action for payroll was actually now being completed since the committee deadline, so that one's been signed off. And we've received updates in relation to the 2 VAT actions, which will both be completed by the end of November. So services just didn't get to us in time. There are some requests for revised implementation dates to be agreed as well. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Any questions? Councillor Hackwell will go first.
Thank you, James, for the report, and thank you, Chair. A quick question. One of the things that are being scoped is the green spaces with North at the moment. Will that include, because I'm not quite sure how North split their own internal thing up, the collection of public waste bins and dog bins? Because I think that's a service that certainly I, as a councillor, get a lot of complaints about them not being emptied, and I see them myself that they've missed the Friday collection, and over the weekend the bins grow and grow and grow. So I would like to see if it's possible to include in that green spaces review the not domestic waste, not household waste, but the public waste that is collected, because I'd like to understand what the governance is on that. And the second thing about the trees, I have a little problem with trees and the lack of action that happens with planning in trees. Is it really reasonable that someone can request a 2-year delay to their action of implementation? The implementation was meant to be, March 22, and they're now requesting March 2024. It causes an awful lot of problems with the general public, the amount of TPOs and the amount of time it takes to actually answer their questions, and they can get 6 months without even any contact, and it's just a poor show all round. And I've voiced my concerns quite loudly with the planning department, but I just don't think extending 2 years is a reasonable request, and I think we need to come down a little bit harder. That's a comment rather than a question.
Yeah. In terms of your first question about green spaces, that's underway at the moment, and I can certainly pass that on to the auditor that's dealing with it, so that that can make sure that's picked up as part of the review, assuming it forms part of the terms of reference. We're certainly looking at the governance around the contract management. In terms of the actions relating to trees, the action that was agreed for a review of the TPOs was fundamentally because of the volume of them and whether they were all appropriate. The reason for all the delays is that it's a very, very resource-intensive project, and at one stage they were looking into the feasibility as to whether the council could have, reasonably afford to undertake that against the risks associated with not doing it. A decision has now been made that that's going to go ahead, but I think the resource in the team with certain restructuring in planning, etc., has been changed and increased with a focus on that. So I think that's the reason for the delays. It's been available resources to do it. They're now in a position that they're really trying to move it forward. So obviously that's why they've said, look, can we just have that bit more time? Although I am speaking on behalf of the service, it's more for them. So.
Councillor Goldman, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, before I ask my question, I'd certainly like to endorse Councillor Hackwell's comments about the tree issue. Certainly there's a number of residents in Lordswood and Walderslade who've had severe delays with getting their issues sorted out. And, I've had to apologise profusely on behalf of the council to these people. But, as Councillor Hackwell said, 2 years, in some cases, when mine was just over 2 years, I believe. It's just totally unacceptable. So, I think the service do need a bit of pressure on them to get it put right. On page 130 of the agenda, there's an activity mentioned, housing finance interface. Although some details given in the summary of findings recommendation, I'm not being a technical person in this particular field. Could you just explain a little bit more, please, James, what actually happened there? Because it sounds a bit complicated to me. I'm failing to understand it at the moment, what actually occurred.
The service came to us for some assistance. I didn't deal with the work personally, so I'm afraid I'm trying to work it out myself. It's about the housing management system obviously records all the rent received, and it's about effectively the internal transfer to our own accounts, so to speak. It's the data, although it's not physically the money, it's the data within there was some issues around the automated reports. There was a concern that some of the data may have been accurate, because if it was, it would throw out all of the budget monitoring and everything else. So they came to us for some independent checks. We did identify a few discrepancies and some missing data. Fortunately, the service had already started picking up on that. They'd suspended the automatic transfer reports and had been doing some manual checks. So the financial forecasting and reporting, although the discrepancies could have impacted, fortunately it was suspended before that happened. So the work that we did has allowed some data cleansing to be undertaken, so that the problems with the reporting are now known, they can be fixed, and then it can move back to that automated transfer of data without that worry about is the data going incorrect. They've corrected whatever the issues were in the system. Does that make sense? I think that's about right.
Thanks, James.
Do I have any other questions? Okay, I'll move to the Vice Chair then, please.
(1.2) at page 123. The committee notes the outputs and performance against the internal audit plan Q1, Q2 for Medway for the period 1st of April to 31st of August 2023, as detailed at Appendix 1 of the report. The committee agrees the revised implementation dates as detailed in Section 8 of Appendix 1 of the report. The committee also notes that James will pass on comments about reviewing waste management in green spaces.
Is that agreed? Thank you. I now move to item 12, Internal Audit Plan, Q3, Q4 for 23-24. And I'll ask James to introduce this report again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be pleased to know this is the last one from me tonight. The proposed plan for Q3, Q4 is presented at Appendix 1 and starts on page 143, although the reviews themselves are listed in the tables commencing on page 146. Our risk assessment was refreshed in July along with updates to the level of resource expected to be available and the draft plan prepared. Overall, the number of reviews that produce a formal opinion that was predicted to be undertaken during the year has been reduced. However, this is in favour of some alternative assurance activity in both adult social care and information governance, which you will see in the tables in the table, I should say, on page that starts on page 147. The activity undertaken will still be providing assurance that will contribute to the overall annual opinion. We're just doing things in a slightly different way. The idea is that this better supports the organisation with preparation for things like the upcoming CQC inspections. The plan itself continues to be focused on the highest areas of risk to provide the necessary assurance to the Council, and as with the plan for Q1, Q2, each review has been assigned an indicative figure of 15 days for planning purposes, but the internal audit manager will have freedom to reduce or increase the allocated budget to ensure that the review provides the right level of assurance. I'm now seeking the committee's approval for the proposed plan for Q3, Q4, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Sorry. Do I have any questions? Councillor Goldman, please.
First of all, just a comment. I will wait with interest the review of the arrangements for the high needs block recovery plan, because that certainly blew my mind with the concept of negative reserves. So that would be an interesting read. But one just below that mentions you're going to do a review on SEND transport. We've recently had quite a severe issue with one or two schools where the young people were left literally standing on, waiting outside for a lift to school that never appeared. This has caused, over the last fortnight or so, quite severe problems. So I hope that will be looked at. My understanding is it was only one company involved. And just remembering that this has been live streamed, I did in my notes write down the name of that company, so I'll just leave that one out for the moment. But whilst it was something went wrong with just one particular contract, it would be perhaps worth looking if there's anything generic in that could be worth looking at across the piece, because this particular incident caused a real headache for a lot of families.
I think that was already covered in another committee, the detail of that.
It has been done.
Yeah.
Well, that would be good, Chair, because from my understanding, there were a lot of problems caused here.
James, I just have one question, and it does relate to one of those issues on, it's 19, the children's social care unregulated premises. I mean, if they're unregulated, how do we even know about them?
What I think this means is this is unregulated placements or placements that aren't necessarily Ofsted approved. They're more bespoke for children where the usual providers are unable to cater for the needs of the individual child for whatever reason. It may be that their needs are so complex the providers can't do it. So what the children's services are forced to do, and it's meant to be for a short-term period, is essentially create a bespoke placement as a short-term fix to make sure that the child is safeguarded while they then explore further providers and things like that. What we're looking at is just looking at those arrangements to manage those placements, make sure that things are short-term and that kind of thing, and that we've got the adequate controls to, because obviously they're going to be high cost as well, to make sure that they're dealt with appropriately.
I think it'll be interesting to see that all placements are supposed to be regulated from a certain date at the end of October, so that'll help you with that one. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hackwell.
James, I look at the scope of this work and I think, well, you could probably spend the next 3 months in just one of those sections, because there's an awful lot of, and I'm a little bit concerned you're trying to bite off too much and not do enough thoroughly. I'd just like your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, we aim to provide, this is where the difficulty comes in, we have to provide a good coverage across all areas of the council to provide that annual assurance. I agree there are probably areas here where the concerns of people outside of the department mean we could spend an awful lot of time with them. I won't go into detail tonight, but there's a few things on here that, let's just say, both sides of the service will be looking to delve into what's going on. I don't want to spoil the surprise for later, especially for the people we might catch. So we're aware, like I say, we're focusing on our activity in areas of higher spend, and you'll see with the links to the corporate risk register, the vast majority of these have a link to risk SR03B, which is obviously the council's financial position. So we are, the financial controls are very high focus with what we're looking at, because that is essentially our biggest risk. But yeah, both sides of the service will be looking at certain aspects of these.
Thank you, James. Any other questions? I move to the Vice Chair then, please.
I move recommendation 1.1 at page 141 that the committee approves the internal audit plan Q3, Q4, 2023-24, presented at Appendix 1 of the report.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.